Welcome to Capitol Hill, where the opposition leader Tony Abbott thinks he's found a way for Julia Gillard to get a mandate on the carbon tax and not put her government at risk. He wants the government to hold a non-binding plebiscite, and the opposition's moved motions in both houses of Parliament, hoping to get the Senate to back it at least before the Greens get the balance of power on the 1st of July. The numbers in the House, though, look a little more shaky. This comes at a time when the Gillard government stocks are at a low ebb, and it's coming up to the anniversary of Kevin Rudd's ousting as Prime Minister. The government did have some support, though. New Zealand's Prime Minister John Key is in town, and he says that country's emissions trading scheme is working well. To discuss the issues, I've been joined by Labor MP Shane Newman and Liberal MP Alan Tudge. Welcome to you both.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Lyndall.
Shane, what's wrong with going to the people and seeking support for your carbon tax proposal?
Well, I wish Tony Abbott had a private word with John Key today. He would have told him how important an emissions trading scheme is in New Zealand, been there since 2008. This is a stunt, pure and simple, by Tony Abbott. This is Tony Abbott involving himself in trickery and simply engaging in political gyrations, acrobatics. It's an attempt to actually just put himself in the mainframe. But also, the other thing he said clearly today, if there was a non-binding vote and the Australian people voted against what he believed, then simply he would not necessarily accept the outcome. What a waste of $69 million of taxpayers' money. And they criticise us.
Alan, the opposition leader, his office has confirmed to me that if the plebiscite did go in the government's favour, the opposition would continue to oppose the carbon tax. Why propose a plebiscite if you're not going to pay attention to what the result is?
Well, we want the Australian public to have a say over the carbon tax. I mean, both Shane and I went to the Australian people at the last election committing that there would be no carbon tax. There'd be no carbon tax under an Abbott government, and Julia Gillard on the eve of the last election said there'd be no carbon tax under a Gillard government. And we think the Australian people should be able to have a say, voice their opinion, if the Gillard government honestly believes that this carbon tax is going to be so good for the Australian people, so good for our manufacturers, so good for the Australian economy, then she should not be afraid of putting it to the people and hearing what they have to say.
If there's one thing the government did get a mandate on, it's the national broadband network. They put it to the election, they campaigned on it quite vigorously. You're not respecting that mandate, so why is it so important for the government to get a mandate on a carbon tax?
Well, with due respect to we campaigned against the national broadband network as well, and so that's why it's different. I mean, in this instance, as I pointed out, all Labor members campaigned against a carbon tax, as did all Liberal members. There was only one member who campaigned for a carbon tax in the House of Representatives, and that was Adam Bant, the Greens member, whereas in the NBN, of course, we campaigned against it. So the government does not have a mandate for the carbon tax. I mean, according to the Prime Minister and the Treasurer, this is going to have a huge impact on the Australian economy. We know the impact it's going to have on everyday cost of goods, putting up prices. We know the impact it will have on Australia's manufacturers in terms of the jobs impacts and making our manufacturers less competitive. And so these are very critical things that should have a proper mandate by the people.
Shane, isn't the risk for you that the people will look at the matter of a plebiscite and say it's not going to cause the government to fall, they don't need to go to a new election? Why can't people have their say through this mechanism?
This is Tony Abbott not accepting the outcome of the last election. This is Tony Abbott every day provides stunts in Parliament every day by moving motions in relation to this. The truth of the matter is that we have always been consistent in wanting to tackle climate change. The coalition has had various positions on this. You had Tony Abbott sitting in the cabinet of John Howard putting forward proposals for an emissions trading scheme in 2007, and quite happy to sit in a cabinet if John Howard won the 2007 federal election. Also urging Malcolm Turnbull to take action on climate change, support a carbon pollution reduction scheme. And, of course, then he's his famous interview on TV where he waxes lyrical about supporting a price on carbon. This is, once again, Tony Abbott showing he doesn't believe in anything, he opposes everything.
I mean, with due respect, Shane, I mean, you said that Tony Abbott is not respecting the will of the people in calling for this. I mean, the people voted for candidates who promised there would be no carbon tax under a government that either Julia Gillard led or that Prime Minister or that Tony Abbott would lead. It's Prime Minister Gillard who is not respecting the will of the people. She looked down the barrel of the camera the day before the election and said that. She said there'd be no carbon tax under a government she led. And we know that had she actually been truthful, had she actually said, yes, there would be a carbon tax, if she was elected Prime Minister, then she would probably not have won the Prime Ministership.
She
would not have won the election.
Had
she actually promised that, she would not have won the election.
Yeah, it's pure speculation. The truth of the matter is the Australian public know we want to take action on climate change. We put forward legislation for an emissions trading scheme last Parliament. The Coalition supported it and then opposed it. Look, the Coalition's full of people who are sceptical about climate change. They're sceptical, and you see that in Parliament every day. We want to take action to actually assist and transition the Australian economy. We want to go with the world. We want to make an impact in a clean energy economy, jobs for the future. Those opposite are really wanting to keep ourselves fossilised in the past. It really is quite an antiquated debate, and they should catch up with what David Cameron's doing in the UK and John Key's doing in New Zealand.
Alan, Shane mentioned John Key. He said today that New Zealand essentially picked up the CPRS, I guess being the only Prime Minister who's managed to get it through a Parliament, and that it's working well, that households are paying about an extra $150 a year, that it's sending a strong signal to change behaviour, and that business is reasonably comfortable with it now. If that's been New Zealand's experience, why wouldn't it be the same experience in Australia?
Yeah, well, first of all, to Shane's point, I mean, as Shane, you know, we do have a direct action policy and we have a similar target to the Labor Party in terms of wanting to reduce emissions by 5% by 2020. So there's bipartisan commitment in terms of the target. We are taking this very seriously.
But if you look at New Zealand's experience...
to New Zealand's point, I mean, New Zealand is different in three ways. Firstly, their emissions trading scheme only applies to the electricity sector. It is not economy-wide, which the carbon tax would be. Second, it is a much, much lower figure in terms of the effective price on carbon than what is being advocated here. They've introduced the price on carbon there is about $10 per tonne, whereas here we're talking about $20 to $30 per tonne, economy-wide.
The Prime Minister said it would get to $25 a tonne by 2013, which is about where Australia might start.
And thirdly, and this is the most important thing, Lyndall, is that both sides of the Parliament in New Zealand went to the election and said that they would introduce an emissions trading scheme. Both of them went, so they had a very clear mandate to do so.
Well, Lyndall, can I make this point? I was in New Zealand just a couple of months ago, talking to politicians on both sides, talking to people on both sides of political perspective. And the truth of the matter is there's bipartisan support for that. Now, if you listen to those opposite, and I've heard speeches in Parliament, you would think that football teams won't play football after the 1st of July 2012. Women won't bear children and the curtains will fade faster. We've had some incredible things said by those opposite,
Shane, why not seek a mandate? Why not seek a mandate by the Australian people?
This carbon pricing mechanism will do. Transitioning, of course, to an ETS is in the best interest of the Australian economy and the best interest of Australian households, the best interest of the Australian nation. And Malcolm Turnbull knows it, John Howard knew it, John Hewson knows it, and yet we have an opposition leader who won't get on board, won't listen to his former leaders of the Liberal Party, won't listen to his compatriots overseas.
But you've been advocating, the Labor Party's been advocating a carbon price for a number of years. What does it say to you that people seem by the polls to no longer trust your government and that your stocks are at record lows?
Well, reform's difficult. It always is. The same thing when the Howard government was in, when they were trying to bring in reforms. Same thing with Hawke and Keating. It's always difficult, especially when those opposite don't adopt a bipartisan approach.
But isn't it a question now that it's a matter of trust?
Well, we believe this reform is in the national interest. We think it's in the national interest, not just of our community, but our economy. We think that the future is clean energy. We think the future is also assisting households and taxing big polluters. Those opposite would tax households and assist the big polluters. That's a very big distinction between our policy and theirs. And look, I don't really think that many in the opposition really believe their direct action plan. $30 billion, $720 extra on households paying income tax or another tax impost. It really is not a policy that's going to work. Everyone knows it. Economists know it. Scientists know it.
Shane, if your policy is so good, you're so convinced about the merits of this, how good the carbon tax is going to be for everyday Australians, for everyday manufacturers. It's going to be so good for jobs. Every day we hear in Parliament the Prime Minister says this is all about jobs, this reform. This new tax is all about creating creating jobs. I mean,
Alan,
why not take it to the people? That's my question to you. Why not seek a mandate? Why did, in fact, you go to the election and say that you would not introduce and not support a carbon tax? That is the key question.
Is it the case that the opposition's never believed the government's legitimate, and that one of the reasons you keep talking about Kevin Rudd, given we're coming up to the anniversary of his deposing, is you'd like to, in some ways, pressure him to leave Parliament and hopefully be able to gain his seat?
Well, Kevin Rudd's doing everything he can to create as not much noise for himself. I mean, clearly he wants the top job back. I mean, he's being interviewed by almost every single news and media outlet. I mean, he's not exactly sitting there quietly as the anniversary of his knifing approaches us this Friday. Peter Beattie says it pretty clearly in the newspapers today that Kevin Rudd is out there and seeking the leadership. We know that he's doing that. And that's what's causing the problem, not what the opposition's doing.
Well, I trust Kevin Rudd at his word. He says he's happy being the foreign minister. He wants to be the best foreign minister possible.
Of course he does.
And he does.
But he doesn't seek the leadership.
He also said he supports Prime Minister Gillard. Look, I support both of them. I think Prime Minister's doing a fine job, Julia Gillard in her role. I think as a Queenslander, I'm very happy to see Kevin as member for Griffith. His electorate starts about 50 kilometres down the road from mine.
And
he also doing a great job as foreign minister. Look at Libya.
What then do you make of Peter Beattie's comments that Kevin Rudd should leave?
Well, I disagree with Peter Beattie because the truth of the matter is Kevin's a political asset for us in Queensland. Always has been and always will be. I'm very pleased, and I've said this publicly, to see him there. I mean, he's come to my electorate since the election. Received warmly and well. He was there at the state conference of the ALP on the weekend with affection and respect. He was treated. I mean, Kevin is a terrific foreign minister. He's doing a great job. I think he's a fantastic local member. Look, during the floods, you saw Kevin rolling his sleeves up, working hard in his electorate. He's always stood up for the south side of Brisbane in Griffith, and I think he's doing that now as the local member, but also as the foreign minister. He's respected in capitals across the world. I think he's doing a fine job in that regard as well.
Alan, why isn't Kevin Rudd doing exactly what Malcolm Turnbull is doing, which is doing his job?
Well, Kevin Rudd, I mean, if anyone who believes that Kevin Rudd is not after the leadership seriously needs to look at themselves. I mean, everybody knows that. He's, as I said before, he's going and doing interviews with every single media outlet.
But Malcolm Turnbull does a fair number of interviews too.
That's right, but it's not on the cusp of the anniversary of his assassination, when clearly Julia Gillard is trying to get some clean air to talk about her accomplishments or lack thereof at her 1 year anniversary. So we know that Kevin Rudd is doing everything he possibly can to win the leadership back. And we know that what he's trying to do, his strategy is actually to appeal to the broader Australian people, to be popular out in the Queensland electorates, where the election is sometimes won or lost, and get the Australian people to be calling for him to be back as leader again. And we saw in the polls that he is clearly the preferred leader for the Labor Party.
Very
60
quickly,
to 30.
We've got about 30 seconds to go.
Well, Linda, I'm happy to take the advice and assistance of Kevin Rudd in Queensland in terms of political campaigning, rather than my good friend Alan here.
That's where we'll have to leave it. Shane Newman and Alan Tudge, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Linda.
Thanks, Alan.
And thank you for joining Capitol Hill. Be with us again tomorrow.